everyone around us is dealing with the effects of the coronavirus. And for this project, I wanted to do something that was affecting me and do a little bit of research up on that. I first decided to look at two sources to see how people are necessarily dealing with the stay-at-home orders and what's going on all around the world. And how people are dealing with self-isolation. And basically, just like we were talking about in Bain, Stat News talks about how loneliness is tied to risks, an increased risk of heart disease, stroke, dementia, high cholesterol, diabetes, and poor health in general. And I thought that was just interesting. That's something that we read. We all know that necessarily the toll that loneliness can go. And self-isolation is definitely something that over time we can indulge into, at least some of us. I also went to BBC and it talked about how many people live alone necessarily in the United States. So we talked about that in Svensson. And the difference is that the people that live alone that weren't necessarily as lonely will not have that will be as active outside because they can't necessarily go out unless it's essential. And so that's something that can be overridden in this situation, that people who do live alone will feel a lot more lonely and may develop into loneliness. Also in this source was a professor, Stephanie Kakiopo, which we actually read her husband's work in this book in our class, which I thought that was interesting. She does basically the same thing. She does behavioral neuroscience and psychiatry at the University of Chicago as well. And she had a couple of tips for people to do, basically not to think too far ahead. But the thing that I want to talk mostly about is something that has happened to me. I've been in front of my screen a lot. I'm doing Blackboard, I'm doing my schoolwork, and when I'm not doing that, I'm on my phone, I'm playing video games, I'm wasting as much time as possible. I'm doing really good at it now, wasting a little bit too much time. But the thing I've noticed is that I've been on this using my screen so much that it's been hurting my eyes. I've actually had to go and buy some Visine for, and they actually had one for overworked eyes for screen time. So obviously it's not just my problem. A lot of other people have this problem with too much screen time, and I've noticed that there's a lot of people are selling glasses on Amazon to get rid of UV light so that necessarily doesn't hurt your eyes. So basically, too much screen time is not good, and everyone's on the screen right now. Kids are being homeschooled using tablets, devices, and when they're not doing that, they're playing video games. Just like me, I'm basically homeschooled because through Gonzaga, and I do my work through Blackboard, and when I'm not, I'm either on my phone or I'm playing video games. Adults, parents, they're also telecommuting, so they're using their computers as a lot as well. If they're not doing that, they're watching TV, they're looking at the news, they're doing everything that has to do with the screen time, and too much screen time is not good. I looked at two different sources on this because I wanted to see, what are the effects? I first found from U.S. News, they're talking about, during this time, maybe screen time isn't necessarily a bad thing, that you should cut yourself some slack. That not all screen time is bad, that we should embrace the boredom. We have a lot of free time, so maybe we can get things done, which is a good way to look at it. You want to think basically a couple days ahead at a time. You don't want to look weeks out because, it's uncertain at this time what we'll be doing in a month from now. But it's a good way to waste time. I agree. But there's a lot of bad things. And Medical Alert in August 2019 published a paper basically that I read through, talked about the things that too much screen time is not good for. Couple of things. It talks about diminished white matter, basically the way when you have too much screen time, you can actually do something between your right and left brain so that they don't communicate as well. That's just something that they've noticed with people who work in offices and look at screens all day long, that necessarily they score way worse when they need their left and right brain to work together. It talks about gray matter atrophy. Basically, it talks about your frontal lobe. You become addicted to things such as social media, video games, all these ways. And we talked about that in Turkle as well, how you become addicted to the way that the connections online feed you all these necessarily lies. Like, it teaches you that life can be great, everything can go the way that you want it and the storyline that you want, but life necessarily isn't like that. So you become a little bit addicted to that, and that can ruin the way that your frontal lobe works. And again, just like we were talking about in Turkle, it talks about how excessive screen time can damage one's ability to feel compassion, develop empathy. And over time, that leads to a lack of social cues and a bunch of other things. And especially in this paper, it talks about how it can damage people's relationships because you don't necessarily interact with people the same way. And I'm not saying that during this time that the increased screen time can go to these effects, but depending on how long we're in this is something that can happen within a few months. Obviously, we know that screen time can contribute to obesity. All the time that we are looking at our phones, our laptops, our TVs, it's time that we're wasting instead of doing things like we're going for a run. And some people can't in cities. They can't necessarily go for a run. It's not essential. But, it can lead to things down the line. Not only obesity, but we're also talking about sleep. It can disrupt sleep. Everyone knows that right before you go to sleep, you don't want a face full of phone. It's not necessarily good. You can't go to bed very easy. So there's a lot of different things and that are going on that we need to realize when we're using our screens, that it's not necessarily the best thing for us. It's a way to waste time. But we need to focus on ourselves, home workouts, things like that. And then I wanted to talk about this for this project just because myself, I notice every day my eyes are tired. I'm overworking my eyes with this screen time. So I'm having to, do more workouts, do a puzzle. My God, anything to not be looking at a screen because, over time it's unhealthy.